What happens when there is a radical shift in your family's faith view? What happens when your parents go from being drug smugglers to smugglers of Bibles? What happens when your parents stop being practitioners of New Age witchcraft to being missionaries to children who are impoverished, initiating food and education programs? Well, you have the beginning of a great story, and that great story is that of today's guest. Welcome to CWS Christian Writing and Speaking. I'm your host, Jackie Wilson, and today's guest is the executive director of Go on the Mission. He is a popular corporate trainer, and he is the author of Speak with Confidence, as well as the new book, Life on Purpose. Let's welcome to the CWS stage, Mr. Michael Acker.
Hey, thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to talking with you and to provide some great value to your audience here today.
Yes, absolutely. I'm excited to hear your story. I'm always excited to hear people's background stories, and yours is most interesting. Your parents were drug smugglers, and then later on in life, they became smugglers of Bibles. They were practicing New Age witchcraft, and then they became missionary. And this changed the entire trajectory of your life. Michael, will you share the story with us?
Yeah, my sister and I often reflect on what would have life been like if they had not.
Mm,
And it's just not a pretty picture that would have been looking like. Yeah, so my dad grew up in one of those homes where no one ever said I love you. And as he was growing up, his dad said you'll never amount to anything. So my dad decided to prove him wrong and found out that while he was in college, he could make more money selling drugs out of his trunk of his car. Now, this is the 60s and 70s, so we're talking mostly marijuana. And then he could just working down at a legitimate operation. It was going so well that he decided to learn Spanish to cut out the middleman and learned how to fly planes so he could go down and pick up the product himself and bring it back.
wow.
Meanwhile, my mom was running away from a guy who wanted to kill her, abusive relationship. She's running away and she's trying to get her power and her sense of well-being from the spirits that she would commune with. She'd go into seances and astral projection, and she would hallucinate so that she could get these kind of experiences. And she connects with my dad when he's selling drugs at a party. They get together. He puts a pistol under his pillow at night. She says, "Perfect. This is the guy for me. I need a guy who sleeps with a pistol under his pillow." And she'd even kind of lobbed a prayer out to the universe about that. Now, fast forward, they're living this life together. They decide to switch out of illegal drugs to legal drugs and start a coffee manufacturing business because they want to have kids. So they bring my sister and I into the world, and we're going along this trajectory of deeply atheist, pagan parents who are not doing anything that is helpful to humanity. They're just living their Seattle city crazy kind of hippie lives. Now, my mom meets somebody at the Christian preschool that we ended up going to just because it was down the street. And that Christian person says to them, "Oh, you like to meditate? You should meditate on the blood of Jesus."
Hmm.
Now, my mom was open to meditating on anything, so she goes into her trance. She meditates on the blood of Jesus, and she said a power course through her unlike anything she'd ever experienced. And she said all that she could describe was that everything else was an imitation of that.
Wow.
And so my mom says, whoever this Jesus is and whatever his blood is about, that's the real deal. And that was her conversion moment. I'm going to be about Jesus. Now she didn't even know what it means. So I just would encourage people right there. You don't always have to like let people know every point of doctrine and have them read through the Bible for them to encounter and know Jesus. Sometimes it's simply for them to experience his love and his truth. So she tells my dad, he's like, "Oh, hey, good for you." He was actually completely agnostic. She burns all her witchcraft books, her spellcraft, all her idols. She burns it right there in our home and goes about the next couple days. Well, my dad and my mom then go to Hawaii, and my dad's in the middle of some difficulties. Some trials are catching up to him. And so he's sitting on a dock and he looks up and he goes, "God, if you're real, then save me from this mess and I'll do whatever you want." He gets up, he starts walking across the parking lot, and he hears the audible voice of God saying, Timothy, I'm Jesus and I'm your friend. And so my dad's like, all right, cool. And the next day he gets the answer to the prayer. So my dad's like, I'm in. Now they're in Hawaii. Now they're both on the same page, and they see this little flyer for Youth with a Mission, YWAM, Loring Cunningham, great organization, missional organization. And they felt like it was Providence, so they signed up for what's a 3-month discipleship training school. They go back to the Seattle area. They grab all their belongings, move to Hawaii with their young kids, and we do an intensive 3 month of schooling. Now, from there, my parents do the 3 month mission part as part of YWAM, where they take their young kids, and we went to Taiwan, we went to Philippines, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, and we went to China. And in China, the mission there was to take a bunch of Bibles, and this is 1985, so you couldn't bring Bibles into China in 1985, and they put them in, and you still really can't, but they put them under the clothing of their kids, mine, suitcase. And then my sister and I had the Bibles, and we smuggled the Bibles in China, praying as it went through the X-ray that they wouldn't be caught. Years later, I talked to my dad about that, Jackie. And I was like, Dad, what were you thinking? He goes, I just figured I'd smuggled all kinds of stuff up to that point in time and never been caught. And now God is with me, so I wasn't going to get caught. Meanwhile, I found out that all my family, like my grandma and my aunt, were just furious that my parents were doing this. So this was the life that I got brought into involved with. When we came back to the Seattle area after that, my dad had made a major shift, went into law. I finished his law degree years ago, so he went into law, and we just set up in a small little town, 2,000 person outside of Seattle, 2 hours, place called Paulsbo, and just took up residence there. I went to a small little Christian school during the time there. And my parents just got involved in missional things. They're like, God saved us. We want people to realize the love of God. So we're on the streets of Seattle doing soup kitchens. We're doing feeding programs. My sister went to Haiti with my dad as a kid to be some part of some poverty relief. We are taking care of some kids in the projects, our next door neighbors, some of our grandparents, and some of their grandkids end up moving in with them. And my dad brought them into the sports programs with us because their dad was in jail. And so we're just involved in things, going down to Mexico to do all kinds of poverty relief there. And so I just saw firsthand what it looked like to be part of caring for the world, of my parents' generosity, just giving and giving and giving and serving and serving and serving. So my dad's practicing law. My mom is a stay-at-home mom. We're going to a nice little Christian private school. And my dad comes home one day and he says, we're moving to Mexico. I quit my job. Well, after some intense conversations, we moved to Mexico the next year and got involved in poverty relief down there. One of the things that my mom realized as she was out in the neighborhoods, the barrios, all by herself, we're talking 5'1.5" woman, a petite woman, and she's out in these neighborhoods walking around, talking to women in the middle of the day, and she finds these three kids who are wandering around, and these three kids have no parent involved. Ends up finding out they're from all three different dads, and that none of them go to school, even though they were all elementary age kids, and they didn't really have great food. They just kind of eat whatever they could find. Their mom would be essentially prostituting herself throughout the day and just in wanton lifestyle. And my mom, this is in the 1990s, puts these kids in her car, brings them to our house, and we lived in a nicer part of the area, and delouses them and really takes care of them, feeds them, brings them back, and tries to figure out how to get them into school. This is all while the mom's like gone doing whatever she's doing, right? And finds out that these kids can't get back into school. So my dad's working as an attorney as well as a missionary down there for a big, huge resort. So he starts talking to the governmental authorities, like, how do we get kids into school who aren't in the school program? Like in the United States, there's systems for that. But in 1990, there wasn't any systems for that in Mexico. So they start an organization to help these kids get back into the school system. And that means remedial teaching, and they work on it. They right, all this kind of stuff happens, right? And my parents are working on it and getting them involved. Eventually, that starts their organization called Home of Hope, where they were feeding, educating, teaching vocational skills to really give all these people a chance to break out of poverty. So that's a little bit of my story.
Let's talk about how it affected your life. It obviously is it's a powerful story, and your parents set you up on the right trajectory. But my understanding is that you actually were thinking about going into law and then end up going into ministry work.
Yeah, when you're firsthand in this kind of life, and I have a lot of empathy for people who are out there doing ministry of any types, or even if they're not Christians, they're doing some kind of NGO type work and they're living on the front fields. And that was us. So I had a crisis of faith, and I'm looking at my life going, well, what do I do? And do I want to follow God? I actually never disbelieved God, just did I want to follow him? So I'm looking at my prospect, and I ended up going, I'm going to go straight to law school. So I get accepted to the top law school of Mexico. In Mexico, you go straight from high school into law school. So I get accepted to the top law school. This is going to be a great career. A starting salary at 2003 would have been $150,000 starting salary coming out of this type of profession. So that's what I was going into. I go back to the United States for the summer before going into the next year. And in that moment, I have this encounter with some leaders who were seeing something in me and encouraging me to live on purpose. And so I started getting involved in the youth ministry, and really their investment in me made me think, you know what? Maybe it is worth looking at serving God and doing that. And maybe it's worth not going back to Mexico where I was not on a good trajectory. Maybe it's worth me re-examining this. So I took 1 week, and I call this my second conversion because I had a conversion as a child where I met Jesus and I said, I'm in. And then as a teenager, at 18 years old, I had my second moment where I said, what am I going to be about? Am I going to be about the things of the world? I'm dating a pretty girl. I'm doing some different things. And am I going to be about doing that, or am I going to jump in? And I decided to jump in. And so I actually stayed in the United States, got super involved in the church, stopped watching TV, stopped playing video games, and stopped dating just to really focus in on this and redirected my life. It was then that God spoke to me about going to ministry. I resisted, I resisted, I resisted, I resisted, and I resisted. And finally, when I didn't resist, I felt the peace of God. And I went into ministry, started as a pastor when I was 22 years old, full time, started as a bivocational pastor when I was 20 while I was in college and entered in. And really, my dad said, Mike, you need a backup plan. I said, I don't have a backup plan. This is my plan. This is my dream. This is what I'm going for. For the next 18 years, I went all in and fully dove in to full time vocational pastoral ministry.
Wow. And then you mentioned about living life on purpose, which is actually the title of one of your books, Live on Purpose. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, when I look at my life at when I was around 18, 19, I was encouraged to write down a mission statement for my life. And so I wrote a couple, 3 words. I think at that point in time, I wrote 3 words down. And then I crafted a different one, and then I kept crafting it. And then by the time I was about 23, I had a crafted mission statement for my life. And a mission statement is just, this is what my life does. Now, God has a huge mission on this world to seek and save the lost, to redeem, to reconcile. That's his prerogative, that's his mission. And we all have roles to play. But the specifics of our roles are different. Like if you are born in Haiti and you are in a desperate situation, your specifics are going to be very different than someone who is born into a multi-millionaire family, and the specifics are going to be very different for uh, a woman over here and a grandma over here. But we all have ways that we can contribute. So I wrote the ways that I felt like I was supposed to contribute. It was going to be my marching orders. So I wrote down this. Now, for the next 20 years till today, I think about that mission statement I wrote, and I've revised it throughout the years. And even when I switched out of pastoral ministry for a while, it it was part of my ongoing marching orders of this is what I'm about. So when I went into this executive director position just in January, I thought, how can I help people find what I had? How can I help people find and really discover their mission statement for their life? So I created Life on Purpose. And really it's a short little booklet that really helps people discover what they're about. And you can get it It's just book.michaelacker.com, and just book.michaelacker.com. We'll go there and you can get a free copy of my book. And in that, it's just walking people through different reflective statements, reflective exercises to get them to a spot where they go, this, this is what I'm about. This is my mission statement. So it's been a huge part of my life. And I would encourage anybody, if you're just wondering, what am I about? What am I doing? To really take the time to describe a mission statement that carries you through even the different seasons of life.
And what has the feedback been? Give me just one or two of your experiences with people who have actually taken your advice and implemented that mission statement into their life.
Yeah, I was talking to Alasia recently. Alasia is actually one of my coaching clients. So I do corporate training and communication work with people. And Alasia is one of my clients, and she was going through it. She goes, "My gosh, this right here is so helpful." Now, she's actually not only in the corporate world, but her husband is a pastor.
Wow.
And so she's in these two different worlds. And she said, "This is just so helpful to give me direction and clarity on what I'm about." And I was working with a gentleman not too long ago, just about a year and a half ago, who in the corporate world actually encountered Jesus. And now he's looking at, what am I about? And same thing. He's like, this gives me clarity as to where I'm going and what direction I'm going. So it helps bring together the different components. It helps you say yes to the things you need to say yes to, helps you say no to things that you should say no to.
Yeah, I love that. And I think everybody is looking for clarity in their life or want to be able
Mhm.
to at least walk in clarity once they figure out what that is. And with what you're doing is you're helping them get that clarity so they can actually have what they truly want out of life. What is next for you, Michael?
So in January, I took on this role of executive director. So after pastoral ministry, I got to a spot, and maybe as you're listening to this, you're at a spot that you're just tired and burnt out and frustrated, or maybe you can relate. And that's where I was after 18 years of ministry. I was working about 7 days a week at that point in time. I was working at a Christ loving Bible centered church that was huge, about 8,000 people. And I was working about 7 days a week, just exhausting myself. And I got to a spot where he was starting to set in, and I was frustration and resentment, and just not, my soul was going towards a negative spot. So so I felt like it was okay for me to take the season off, but I would come back to ministry. And in that, I got recruited into sales. And so I went into sales, and then I wrote a book during that time. And that turned out to be what I ended up doing, corporate training. But after doing that for 5 years and very successful, took a $400,000 territory, turned into an $8 million territory, other great successes. After doing that 4 or 5 years, I looked at my life and just thought, okay, I love this. There's so many good things going on here, but I miss that kind of hands on equipping saints for ministry. And I don't really want to go back to pastoral ministry. I did that, did it successfully. It was a great season of my life, many great memories. The churches I've been part of are still vibrant. But what do I do now? And so I had been part of Go on the Mission, which is just goonthemission.com. And I had been the chair of the board for many years. And then I had stepped away. And so I'm looking at it going, what if I went back to be an executive director of something like that? What if I lead something like that? So not a church, but something that meshes the church world, Jesus, following Jesus, making disciples, and brings together some of the organization, corporate aspects that I've learned. And so I was thinking about that. And then all of a sudden, they reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in applying for the role? Our executive director just retired. Would you be interested?" And I felt like, well, that's of the Lord right there. I said, absolutely would love to. Applied for the role. A couple months later, was offered that. So now, January 2nd, I started that position. And here's what we're about. We are about equipping children to break the cycle of poverty through really three main pillars: nourishment, education, and hope. And really, if you look at a person who's in the most desperate, impoverished situation, so think about that child who's in the slums of India, or on the streets of Mexico, or in the rural areas of Africa. And you look at that and go, what do they need? One, they need nourishment. So if you don't have water, if you don't have food, if you don't have essential medical care, then you will be relegated to poverty. Okay, once you get that, then you need education, you need training, you need vocational skills, you need financial management skills, you need general education, you need to read and write, you need basic math. You need those to even do something basic. And if you don't have that, you're going to be relegated to poverty. And then you need hope. And where does hope come from? We believe the best hope comes from Jesus Christ. And we introduce him to Jesus, that your future is secure in him, that you can know him, that he can change you, that he'll take you out of the miry clay, set your feet upon the rock. And if you have hope, education, and nourishment, then you have three main pillars that will provide a pathway for you to step out of poverty. So that's what Go does. We provide those three pathways, and we do it by working with international partners. So we don't go, hey, India, hey, Guatemala, hey, Burkina Faso. We know what's what. We're Americans. We don't do that. We go in there and we listen, we listen, we listen. We say, what's going on? What's working? What do you need? How can we help? How can we serve? How can we collaborate? You're the national experts. We are your international friends and partners, and we will work together in a create way that we can create sustainability and ongoing progress. And so we work together. We do a lot of child sponsorship. So we have 463 kids sponsored. And so if you're listening and you go, you know what, that resonates with me, I'd love for you to sponsor a child. That would be that would be make my day by sponsoring a child right there. And if you are looking at this going, man, I'd love to do something, well, trips, take a trip and visit. When we go to Senegal, 95% of the population is Muslim. So 5% of the population is other. A small percentage of that is Christian. Now, of those Christians, imagine you are 1, 2% of the Christians in the entire nation. Wow. How alone do you feel? But when we send teams from Canada, Europe, or United States, or even from other places, then they go and people feel like, not alone. We got brothers and sisters around the world, and the hope that it brings them to keep doing their work. So we do that. We do projects like we're working on funding a secondary school or a bus or something like that. So all these efforts to provide the three pillars that people can get out of poverty. And that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm passionate about. I still do some corporate training. I still do some writing. I just finished writing the rough draft of a book called The $30 Day, talking about how $1.30 per day can change a child's life. And that's coming out this summer. But that's my passion. And as you're listening, if any of this resonates with you, I'd love for you to be a part of
Yeah, love it. Absolutely love it. So you have mentioned your websites before, but tell people where they can find your book and where they can connect with you on social media as well.
it. Yeah, absolutely. So you can go on to Amazon, and I have two different author names on Amazon, just Mike Acker for my corporate work, or Michael Acker for my nonprofit work. And you can go to michaelacker.com or mikeacker.com for those two different aspects of what I do. But I'd love for you to go to goonthemission.com. Goonthemission.com is the organization that now I get to lead and be a part of and really cast a vision for the future, and love to get you invited in that and for you to find a sense of purpose. If you want my book, I'll give it to you for free. Book.michaelacker.com.
Yeah, yeah. Michael, as we wrap up your interview today, what is the one thing that you want to leave with the audience? The one thing that they can take action on today to change their lives?
Where you are is not where you have to stay. So if you're in a spot where you're disappointed, you're down, you're depressed, you're frustrated, or even exuberant, but you know there's more, that where you are is not where you have to stay. And you don't have to jump to the different location. You don't have to go from unfit to fit. You don't have to go from depressed to joyful in one day. You just need to take the next step. But sometimes the next step is just doing something outside of yourself, doing something for someone else, and really finding out that when you give to others, you receive so much. Maybe the next step is reconciling. Maybe the next step is going back to church. Maybe the next step is writing down your story. Maybe the next step is is subscribing to Jackie's podcast. And you've been listening, but you haven't subscribed. Whatever it might be, the next step can be huge or it can be small, but take the next step. Don't feel like you have to jump into your mission. Maybe the first step is just writing down one component of your mission.
Love it. Love it. CWS audience, you have heard him. There are so many golden nuggets dropped throughout this interview. Just initially talking about what his parents' past was and how it changed his life. That just tells us we do not have to stay in the same place, just like he just said, that you can have a new beginning and not only change the trajectory of your life, but all of those people's lives that are around you. God has something specific for you to do, and He can take those habits that you already have, the things that you have done in the past, and He can turn that around to use it for His good. Great example, of course, is Saul Paul. We saw how God changed his life and used that same vibrancy that he had to go out and bring and introduce people to Christ. Whatever it is that you have, whatever talents, gift, ability, habits, God can use that. It is just a matter of you choosing to give it over to Him for His use, and He will give you that direction, clear that path for you. And if you have questions, like Michael said, go get his book. It's free. Create the mission statement and then see how God blesses and changes your life. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And until next time, beautiful people, God bless.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. Thanks again, and see you next time.